Myra, your light's not shining.
Oh, I forgot to turn it on when I got to church.
That's okay. Sometimes I forget it too. And sometimes I forget to turn it off when I leave church.
Yes, I like to shine my light at church, but in public, I like to keep it private.
That's right. If you start sharing your faith in public, you can really offend a lot of people.
Yeah, did you hear about that high school senior who was sharing her faith about Jesus at school? She should have known better.
She should have, and I heard about that. It's a wonder she didn't get suspended.
I walked into a restaurant a while back with my light on. They could have refused to serve me.
We need to be extra careful about what we say in public.
Well, I think we should keep our faith private. It's nobody's business.
I agree, so don't forget to turn your light off when you leave church.
Oh, don't worry, I will.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Great singing, great acting. I almost feel like we could just have an invitation time now and go home. Now, last time, I couldn't get I got it on, I think.
Get that thing out of your way.
What thing?
That pulpit, Mike. Get that out of your way.
Yes, sir. We've had a great...
It's okay.
I didn't have this thing fast. I was about to say, last time I had trouble with that other microphone. I don't think it's me that has trouble with the microphone. I think it's the microphone that has trouble with me. But anyway, great start to the service so far. Last time I preached here, I think a lot of people had trouble hearing me. Well, recently, my wife forced me to get hearing aids. Now, by the way, when I started singing that little tune there, she was supposed to stand up in the back and start doing this, and she didn't do it. I don't know what's wrong with her, but can y'all hear me all right this morning?
Just a little bit. There you go.
All right.
There you are.
But when I wear those hearing aids, and I don't have them in this morning, when you get old, things like that, you need a little extra help with things. Before long, I'll be walking around with a cane. But when I wear those hearing aids, I tend to whisper. And my wife has trouble hearing me sometimes when I've got those things in, so I tell her, you need to go get some hearing aids. But she's refused to do that so far. We're going to look first at John chapter 8, verse 12. I think you've probably figured out already what I'm going to talk about today, letting our light shine in public. Now, hopefully, those two ladies that did this, I think they deserve an Oscar. But these two ladies that did our little drama skit, that's not really the way they are when they go in public. I hope that they do let their light shine. And so we should all do that. But John chapter 8, verse 12, then Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, there's some interesting things about light. One, and you may already know this, but you know that when now I don't recommend that you go out and look at the sun. If you've got some kind of a filtered lens and you can look at the sun, what you see up there, if you see something happening on the sun, it's already happened.
Right.
8 minutes ago, it takes 8 minutes for light to travel from the sun back to the earth. Now, if you could travel at the speed of light, you could travel all the way to the moon and back in 2.5 seconds. And I know this is all true because I read it on the internet. But now, I do know this because I looked in several different places, but light consists of little packets of things they call photons. Now, if you want to know exactly what a photon is, ask Lance, because I don't have a clue. But one thing I do know is that light does exist.
Yeah.
Light is a real thing. It exists. I'd always thought it consisted of molecules of some kind, but I discovered by reading about it a little bit in the last couple of weeks that it's photons. Got any scientists in here? Maybe sometime you can tell us what a photon is. I'm not sure. But we do know that light does exist, but darkness does not exist. How many of you know who Alexander Hamilton III is? One person. He's on a Christian radio station, and I first heard that from him, that darkness is nothing. Let that sink in. Darkness is nothing. It is simply the absence of light. Darkness does not consist of something called antiphotons or anything else. It's just simply the absence of light. So where there is no light, there's darkness.
Right.
So Jesus brought light into the world. Now, when he's talking about light, he's talking about knowledge and truth. And so, as his representatives, we are to reflect that light.
Right.
Now, I want you to think about this. What does light do for us? First, it gives us an understanding of reality. We may hear something in the darkness, we may be afraid, but if we turn the light on, maybe it's nothing at all. It's nothing to be afraid of. There was an old Hindu or Indian proverb, and I probably won't tell it just exactly right, but I think there's several versions of it anyway, about the 6 blind men and an elephant. Anybody ever heard that before? Nobody? Well, at least I know something that you don't know. But these 6 blind men, they've never seen, of course they couldn't see anything, they've been blind their whole life, but they've never experienced an elephant. So somebody brings them up to the elephant and they said, touch the elephant and tell us what it is. They don't tell them it's an elephant. So one touches the trunk and he thinks he has his hands on a big snake. Another one touches one of the tusks and thinks he's holding a big spear. Another one touches the ear and he thinks he's touching the big leaf on some kind of a tree. Another one's rubbing the elephant's side and thinks he's rubbing a big rock. Another one's got his arms around the leg of the elephant and thinks it's a giant tree. Now, why do they not understand what the elephant is? Because they've never experienced an elephant before. Nobody told them what it was, and they can't see it.
Right.
But if they could suddenly see it, they would know that it's a big animal. And so that's what happens to us when we can't see the truth. Now, who was the one in that story who knew what the elephant was? It was one narrating the story, the one telling the story. And so if we want to know truth, we need to go to the one who understands what truth is.
Amen.
Now, light gives us an understanding of reality. It also provides us with guidance through our life. I remember once when I was 5 or 6 years old, and we moved. I grew up in Woodville. We lived in an old house we just moved into this old house about 3 miles out of town, east of town, going toward Jasper. Hadn't been there long, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night and had to go to the bathroom. I was not afraid. I wasn't scared of the dark, but I just couldn't remember where the bathroom was. I couldn't remember where the door was. I couldn't remember where the light switch was. So I got up slowly and I walked real slow. I didn't want to fall over something until I found a wall. And then I just walked around that wall, feeling of the wall until I found a light switch. And once I turned the light switch on, I thought, there's the bathroom door right over there. You know, I knew where everything was, and once I could see.
Right.
So light provides guidance for us. We know where to go. We know which path to take. A lot of people who don't have light in their life, they don't have the light of Jesus, they don't have the light of God. And so they just sort of stumble through life. So light provides, it gives us an understanding of reality. We know what reality is. And it provides guidance for us. Now, truth, I read this somewhere, truth is that which corresponds to reality. Now, there's a lot of people in our world today and in this country who are in leadership positions, but they have really no understanding of what reality is. What is truth? They're walking in darkness, and it's been all over the world for decades, but it's really beginning to overtake this country. There's no light to guide these people, and they refuse to come to the light so that they can see the truth.
Right.
Now in Matthew chapter 5, verses 14, 15, and 16, Jesus shares that light with us. Because here he said, Matthew 5:14, he says, you are the light of the world, talking to his disciples. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine therefore before men, so that they can see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven.
Amen.
So, when we think about Jesus being the true light that has come into the world, that we're sort of like the moon. You know, the moon does not produce light on its own, you know that. It simply reflects the light of the sun. So if the earth is here and the sun's here and the moon's up here, we may not be able to see the sun, but the sun shines on the moon and reflects that light to the earth. So that's really our purpose in life, is to reflect the light of Jesus, just as the moon reflects the light of the sun.
Amen.
Now, we are to shine our light, he says here. We are the light of the world. We are his light of the world for two things: so that people can see our good works, and they can also, by seeing what we are, they can glorify the Father who is in heaven. Now, if you think that, you know, a lot of times and it's true, I think, that the best witness we can have is the way we live our lives.
Yes.
But you also have to open your mouth. If we never open our mouth, people will never fully understand why we live the way we do. I know a lot of really, really good people who act in the right way, who are good examples in every way by the way they live their life, but they're not Christians. You know, humanly speaking, they're good people. So if you're one of those people that thinks that you could just walk through life, just living a good life, and never open your mouth to be a verbal witness about Jesus, and you think that we should just leave other people alone. I had a deacon preach at a church one time on Sunday morning, and Sunday night before church, he walked out and said, because I said something about Mormonism, he said, I don't want to hear you talk about those Mormons anymore, because we've got a lady in our church whose son is a Mormon, and you might hurt her feelings. Well, I didn't really know how to respond to it, so I just said, well, okay, and went on. But if you're one of those people that thinks that you can just walk through life and you think that we should just leave other people alone. That's what he told me. He said, we ought to just leave other people alone, let them believe what they want to believe. Let them find their own way to God. Well, we know if we read the Bible that there's only one way, and that's through the Jesus of the Bible. He is the only way. But if you're one of those people that thinks that you can just walk through life, living right, but never speaking the word, and just leaving everybody else alone, just let them believe what they want to believe, and maybe you need to change your way of thinking.
Yeah.
Because if Jesus had done that, see, Jesus was crucified, he was ridiculed his whole life, then he was tortured, and then he was crucified for speaking the truth.
Right.
Now, if he had never said anything, they'd probably left him alone. They didn't care if he performed miracles and healed people and gave blind people their sight. But once he started speaking, that's what really caused them want to crucify him. So the same thing as with Peter and John in the first few chapters of Acts. If you read that, they were thrown into jail a few times and beaten and warned to never speak in the name of Jesus again. What did they do? I can't remember exactly where it is, but once they went back to the church and they said, we thank God that we're able to suffer for the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
So, we not only need to live right, reflect light in that way, but we need to speak it. We need to speak the truth. Now, if you think about the Apostle Paul when he was in Athens in Acts chapter 17, you don't need to turn to it, I'm not going to read it. But Paul was walking through Athens. Now, one thing about Paul, he didn't just sit around and wait for some opportunity to fall in his lap. And it's not very often in life that we have somebody walk up to us and say, you act like a Christian and I'm not a Christian. Would you tell me about Jesus? That just don't happen. So we got to figure out ways. Somebody once said, a good man will make more opportunities than he finds. Well, I think that was one of Paul's qualities, one of his talents or whatever. He created opportunities, but as he was walking through Athens and he was seeing all of these idols, and it sort of bothered him. These people are worshiping idols, and then he saw a monument or a statue, I don't remember exactly what it said, but a monument to the unknown God. He said, here's my opportunity. And so he began to preach, and tell people, this is the God that I want to tell you about. This is the God I want to tell you about. And so when we are at work or wherever we go, when we're not in church, we need to look for opportunities not only to share our faith by the way that we live, but also opportunities to speak to other people.
Amen.
Because they may never know the truth if somebody don't tell them.
Yeah.
Now, there may sometimes be a cost to that, but remember that Jesus was crucified for what he said. There's a famous occultist wrote in his famous book, he said it does not matter. Yeah, I read some of that stuff to find out what the enemy's thinking. He said it does not matter what altar you kneel at, as long as you kneel at some altar. So you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Hindu, you can be a tree worshiper. I had a good friend years ago, used to work for me, and he had a problem with alcoholism, and so he started going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, they teach you in Alcoholics Anonymous to have a greater power, to look for a greater power. He said they tell you it can be anything. He said, so I go out and sit under an oak tree in my backyard. He said, I just sit out there. He said, I don't talk. I just sit out there and sort of let my spirit commune with the spirit of this oak tree. I don't think that would do anybody much good. And I told him, I said, well, you know, you can go out there and commune with that oak tree all you want to. That oak tree can't do anything for you unless you cut it down and burn it in your fireplace, or make something out of it. But what happens when the church loses its light? I want you to think of just a minute. In 1917, the Bolsheviks, or we refer to them as the communists, led by Vladimir Lenin, took over the country of Russia and ended up controlling a lot more than just the nation of Russia. But these people killed somewhere between 12, nobody really knows the exact number, it might have been higher, somewhere between 12 and 20 million professing Christians, because they wanted to shut them up. They wanted to shut the church up. Now, we get upset when we hear about Hitler and the Nazis killing somewhere around 6 million Jews. The Russian communists killed somewhere around 60 to 80 million people overall. That was a nation that had lost their light. Now, when Jesus tells the church, you are the light. Now, the light of that church in Russia had gone out years before the communists came along. The communists there did not extinguish the light. The church extinguished the light. Now, there's always pockets of true biblical Christianity everywhere you go. But the Russian Orthodox Church had no light to begin with. Now, you might have heard this term before, a cut flower. The church there was a cut flower. Now, my wife got some zinnias planted. You know, she likes to take up part of my garden space to plant flowers. I like to plant something to eat, but she tells me that you can't eat some of these things some of these flowers she plants, but I don't plan on eating too many zinnias. I'd rather eat some squash or tomatoes, some potatoes, stuff like that. But I love my wife, and so I help her plant her flowers. But she wants to grow these zinnias, and they're beautiful. You know, she wants to grow them so she can go out there and with little snippers and snip them off and put them in a vase and put them in the house somewhere. Now, you may have some roses or some other kind of beautiful flowers, and I like flowers. For a long time in the spring, I won't cut my grass because I like to let the little wildflowers grow. And sometimes I'll pick some of them, bring them in the house. But you know that when you cut a flower, you cut it from its source of light, from life, the flower is dead. It's basically dead. This may explain why God told Adam and Eve in the garden, if you disobey me and eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, on the day that you eat of it, you will die. Because they were cut off from their source of life. And they eventually, I think Adam lived like 930 years. Now, unless he repented at some point and came back to God, he was dead. And so when you cut a flower, it's dead because it's been cut off from that source of life where it got all its nutrients. Now, you can put some... and that's not always the case because I tell you, we've got some sweet potatoes sitting in some mason jars in the window, and those things are sprouting. We're going to try to have a successful sweet potato bed later on in the summer. Some things will go for a long time, but even a sweet potato like that won't live forever. They're eventually going to die. And I wonder if that's not what has happened to this country. Now, I'm talking in a very general sense, kind of in a worldly sense here. just like in the Soviet Union, the church, I wonder if the communists had even been successful if there had been a true light church, a church that let their light shine in that country.
Right.
And I wonder if the things that are happening in this country are because the church has let the light go out.
Yeah.
So now let's bring this down to a more personal note now. I'm going to turn over to Romans chapter 12. I'm going to read one verse, and if you can get there before I do, you can read along with me. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. The Apostle Paul wrote, "And do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Now, I read from the New American Standard Version. It says, "Do not be conformed," but the word "conform" there is an active verb. It's something that you can do to yourself. Just like a lizard, you know, when a lizard's crawling around out, if he's on the concrete on the porch, it may be kind of a gray color. If he climbs up one of those posts in our back porch, he's going to turn brown. And if he gets out in the grass, he may turn green, because they change colors with whatever their environment they're in. And so this verb here, conform, is an active verb. It means that's something you can do to yourself. But the other verb there, transform, be transformed, is not something that we can do to ourselves. We have to allow God to change our lives,
Amen.
to change the way we think, to change the way we walk, to change the way we speak. Only God can do that in somebody's life. And he says there that you're transformed by the renewing of your mind. I kind of think that that's part of what John 3, in John chapter 3, when Jesus was talking about being born again. I think that's part of what he's talking about. We begin to change the way we think. Now, God don't just zap us and changes us overnight. You know, it takes time sometimes. But he transforms us and gives us a new way of looking at the world. Our worldview changes. So we can conform to the world, turn off our light, and conform to the world. Or we can allow God to transform us into somebody that he can use. Now, in conclusion, Jesus said that we shouldn't put our light under a basket. Now, if I put my light under a basket and I hide it where others cannot see it, someone may never hear the gospel from another person. If you've ever read the book of Jeremiah, God told Jeremiah, he said, "This is what I want you to go tell the nation. This is what I want you to tell the rulers. This is what I want you to tell anybody that will listen." He said, "If you don't tell them, their blood will be on your hands." And so if I don't tell somebody about Jesus when I have the opportunity, if you don't tell somebody about Jesus when you have the opportunity, and that person never comes to Jesus Christ, will their blood be on our hands? I think so. So don't let that other person go into eternity because you refuse to tell them about Jesus Christ. I'm going to read two other verses and make just a couple of comments. One is Psalms 119, verse 46. Well, I'm not going to turn to it and read it. But there David said, "I will speak of your testimonies before kings and not be ashamed." Now, we know David was the king of Israel. I will speak of your testimonies. In other words, I will tell people about you, Lord, I will tell kings about you and not be ashamed. And Romans chapter 1, verse 16, the Apostle Paul wrote the words, I am not ashamed of the gospel. So let's not be ashamed. Let's pray and ask God to fill us with His Spirit, give us His wisdom, and teach us to be witnesses for Him. And Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20. The last words of Jesus recorded in the book of Matthew, He said, go and make disciples and teach them all that I have commanded you. So we think very often that we just tell somebody about Jesus, say, would you like to invite Jesus into your heart, and say a little prayer, and then we're on our way. He says, we make disciples by teaching them all that He has commanded us. So let's make it a part of our life to let our light shine when we're in public, not just when we're here. You know, it's easy to talk about our faith when we're in church. It's a little more difficult because when we go into the world, just like the ladies were talking about, if you bear witness for Jesus in school or in a restaurant or anywhere else, sometimes there may be a cost to it. Now, we have not seen severe persecution in this country like in many other countries. But let's make it a point to learn how to be a witness by reading His Word, by praying, by asking God to fill us with His Spirit. So when we go into the world, we can be the witness that He wants us to be.